Glow Up Gospel.
Glow Up Gospel.
Glow Up Gospel. The transformation only God can bring.
Okay, so this is the Glow Up Gospel podcast, episode, I'm pretty sure 7. So today we're going to be looking at a video with Alex O'Connor debating 20 Christians with it's a Jubilee video. And I'm going to be using this not to attack Alex O'Connor in any means or any way, but as an example of arguments of atheists to kind of give cases for Christianity and kind of give you some more insight of apologetics. Maybe you watched it and you're just curious, or maybe you've just, or maybe you've never heard of these arguments before, but you might at some point. And it just makes your faith stronger as well. All right, so, but before all of that, real quick, if you want to support me, you can go to the, you go to the link down below for the UNFORSAKEN Christian UNFORSAKEN Christian Apparel brand, and it's a Christian gym clothing line that I personally love a lot. If you want to support me, you can go and follow my affiliate link down below and use my code, and you can get 10% off. Okay, so now we're gonna go. He makes 4 claims. Plus, there's like an end debate with him against this Mormon. I'm not necessarily going to be talking about that, but he makes 4 claims, and he invites the Christians to he invites the Christians to come and like debate against his claims. This is actually the second attempt to record this video. I actually was trying to record it last night at like 11 to 1 o'clock in the morning, but something happened with the recording, so I was not able to record. It was very, very, very aggravating. So I essentially only recorded 4 minutes out of a 2-hour video, which this is not gonna be 2 hours long. It was just that last night with the whole video was 2 hours, but I was going to cut it up into a lot shorter. And today, actually, I will probably not do certain things to make it shorter as well. Okay, so claim 1 is suffering makes God's existence unlikely. So what we'll do, we'll go ahead and watch the clip.
Nice to meet you, Sage. Why don't you just begin? Why is suffering or evil make God's existence unlikely?
I think when confronted with 2 hypotheses, so atheism, naturalism, or theism, we should ask what we expect would occur under either hypothesis. And then we look at the world and we see what does actually occur. And what do we find? We find, I think most relevant here, a system of natural selection, the mechanism by which God apparently chose to bring animals and ultimately human beings into existence. A system which is defined by suffering. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and suffering and destruction of the unfit. I'm told that the very mechanism that God chose to bring about the human species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
First off, Alex O'Connor talks about animal suffering and why he views animal suffering as a means or a reason why it is unlikely that God exists, or probably more specifically the Christian God. I'll show a few more clips about that claim in a second. But I will go ahead and say as well, though, that first off, this question, like, does animal suffering truly make the existence of a God unlikely? I would say no, just because you do not understand said God does not make him unlikely. I would also say that that argument does not supersede all the other evidence we have to believe in a God. All the other evidence we have to believe in a God says that there is a God. Now, I don't see how animal suffering could necessarily take away all the other evidence we have to believe in God, and just because you don't understand him. So, but I'll go more in detail about that in a second, though. But I do want to show these other clips first, though, real quickly. Yeah, let's go to, okay.
Good work.
Alex, my man.
How's it going? Nice to meet you too.
Okay, so my first question to start out with is, what exactly about suffering makes this unlikely
on the condition that God exists?
I think that if God is all loving, then he probably wouldn't want his creatures to suffer. And so I think that the fact that they do suffer makes his existence less likely.
Okay, perfect. And is there some specific aspect of suffering that you're particularly honing in on, horrendous or whatever
in
that is?
particular, non-human animal suffering. Because I think that the Christianity has a celebrated tradition of theodicies trying to explain why suffering exists.
Yeah.
Human free will, the development of the soul, higher order goods, all of this kind of stuff, none of which apply to the suffering of non-human animals.
Okay, so I will say that I appreciate the fact that he does admit that there is plenty of reasons and theological answers and truths that we see of why there is human suffering, which a lot of atheists don't necessarily always agree with and don't always hold to. I appreciate that. And then I will also say, and of course he goes more into like the animal suffering. I will say I do appreciate that. Now let's go to the next clip, and then I'll really just fully talk about it.
To suffer
It's
a
not
bunch.
means to ends. This is not means to ends.
God might cause them to suffer a bunch and then essentially redeem them in the afterlife. But what for? Like, why do this? If I were to punch you in the face and then give you $20,000 afterwards, you might be grateful for the $20,000.
Yeah.
But why couldn't I just give you the $20,000?
Well, see, so that
So his example of like why not give the $20,000? Again, he's essentially saying because I do not understand him, because I do not understand why God therefore does not exist. That's a very faulty reasoning. So animal suffering really does not disprove the fact of God's existence, and we should not take it that it transcends the evidence that proves God's existence. While we may not understand, we cannot be so arrogant to condemn God for his judgment, decisions, or control over the universe. See, the arrogance to say that because you do not understand the why behind God, so therefore he must not exist, that's not only illogical, but also extremely arrogant. See, how could we possibly understand the full extent of the why behind God? Even as Christians, while we claim that God's revealed parts of his character, will, plan, and purpose to us, we do not claim to understand God to the fullest extent or some of the why behind things. Okay, so continue. We do not claim to understand God to the fullest extent. While we do believe that, we do claim that God's revealed part of his character, will, plan, and purpose to us, we do not claim to understand God to the fullest extent or some of the why behind things. And then there's a great article that I will show the link to below with Bible Hub, kind of going over the topic of animal suffering and why they suffer if they cannot sin. It covers points like, understanding that all creation is under a single fall, and that while they suffer not because of their own sins, but because of the direct consequences of our sin, and because since we were it goes over because there's a great article with Bible Hub and how it goes over why animals suffer if they can't sin, and how the first point is understanding all creation is under a single fall, and how they suffer because of the fact that they are under our direct command or authority or placement, and sadly that makes where they are all instances of our own sin. And so then it also goes to the distinction between human sin and animal suffering, and then it kind of goes into some of the reasons and just the perspectives of why animals will face hardship if they are not being tested, which usually testing is what is a common example and reason of why there's human suffering. And then it also says how there's still goodness of God in animal life, how God still cares about his creation. He shows that. And we are still expected to take care of God's creation like we were commanded in Genesis 1:28. And then, of course, you go into the future restoration and hope of creation. And there's also, it goes over some philosophical and theological perspectives over it. And it goes into some practical insights for addressing animal suffering. And it kind of concludes it. So that's a great article if you want to read more about that and get more of an understanding of what I just kind of went over briefly. You can. That'd be a great article to read. I will have it linked down below. But some scripture to back up my claim earlier, with the fact that to say that because I do not understand God, therefore he is not real is illogical. It's like saying, well, because as a guy, because I do not understand women all the time, therefore women are not real. That's an illogical flow of argument. And so while Alex O'Connor sounds very intellectual and sounds very smart with that argument actually very quickly falls apart and is very illogical, and it's not something to take seriously, honestly. I wish somebody would have called him out for it in this debate, but no one did. With some scriptures to kind of back that up as well, to kind of give you understanding of this whole worldview, because I will admit he's coming from a different worldview, which does affect his whole thought process and his arguments. He's coming from a different worldview. You have to remember that. But some scripture to show and shed light into the Christian worldview of why this is also true and why his argument would be illogical is, you get Isaiah 55, 8-9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. You get Proverbs 35, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, and all your ways submit to him, and he'll make your path straight. It shows that we cannot possibly understand God. So if just because we don't understand him doesn't make him any less true. I mean, you're trying to understand something that is above our own thinking. I mean, we cannot possibly understand God. That's an impossible thing to do. So that argument really does not hold very well. Claim 2 is God commanded genocide in the Bible. Let's watch the clip real quick about that.
So I think that the two most problematic are in 1 Samuel 15, the destruction of Amalek, and in the book of Joshua, the destruction of Jericho and the destruction of Ai. So for the sake of the audience who might not know about this, in 1 Samuel, for example, the Amalekites are a Canaanite tribe. They're in the land that's been promised to Israel. Israel are instructed through the prophet Samuel. King Saul is told to completely destroy the Amalekites, leave nothing alive that breathes, kill man and woman, child and infant, cattle and sheep. And in fact, when Israel does as they're instructed, they destroy Amalek, except Saul decides to keep the king as a captive, and he also saves the best of the animals. The prophet Samuel comes to him and says, what have you done? And he says, well, we kept the best of the animals in order to sacrifice to the Lord. And it says twice that God regrets that he made Saul king. Why does he regret that he made Saul king? Because Saul didn't follow his commandment to completely destroy the Amalekites by keeping the king alive and by keeping the best of the livestock.
Okay, so I first will say, I would say that his interpretation of that whole thing about Saul and why God was upset with Saul is misleading and somewhat wrong. I would say that God was upset at Saul not because necessarily that it wasn't strictly that he just didn't kill everybody, but it was more the fact that Saul showed a lack of faith in God, and he did not have, because he kept everything he felt like he would need. And he kept what he felt like, the nation could use or he could use, instead of having faith and trusting in God's providence. And he superseded God's command and said, no, what? God doesn't know best here. I need to do this because, this is the right decision. It's showing a lack of faith. That's what God was upset about. Now let's go. Can I give you guys context what genocide is, what genocide he is talking about? And let's go to the next clip real quick.
Good to meet you.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Okay, I disagree. I love to look at the case of the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15.
Sure.
So 1 Samuel 15, it says, he uses that phrase, every man, woman, child, and then the lists off the animals,
Yep.
right? So we presume that by the end of that, if only Agag and the animal comes back, that they're all dead.
And then they show up later
Again,
in the chapter. Yeah.
chapter 27 and in chapter 30. Even King Agag, his descendants come up in the book of Esther.
Yes.
Right. So like if we're saying, just for example, we have verification that there are children related to the Amalekites who must have been there because it's Agag's children, where else would they be? And they're alive because his descendants go on through Haman, which comes up in Esther. So how do you reconcile
There are a few
that?
things to say. Firstly, one of the points where some of the Amalekites come up again, it's explicitly said that these are people who escaped. These are people who escaped. And so it's possible that God commanded that all of Amalek was destroyed. And the word Haram there means utterly destroy. That might also involve a driving out of the land. So it's possible that some of them escaped, and that's where we get the descendants from. That seems totally plausible to me. The question is, did God command a genocide? By the way, genocide includes forcible expulsion from somebody's land in a case of ethnic cleansing. It's like, for example, do you think that any innocent children, maybe let's not use the word innocent for theological reasons, but do you think that any infants were killed in the destruction of Amalek?
I have no idea. I don't think that it's recorded.
Okay, but you think that God definitely commanded the killing of...
No, I don't think. I think that's hyperbolic phrasing. And I know I've heard you say it before. I heard you talk about this. You've heard that before, that it's hyperbole. But
Okay, so that's actually really important to understand. I think he actually did a pretty good job, the Christian there, of explaining kind of what's going on there with that passage. I actually do kind of like his explanation. He could have done maybe a little bit better job, but in general, I agree with what he was saying. So yeah, I mean, I've talked about this before myself with, my article, if you want to go read it, about, the question, does God promote genocide? And I even have a short about genocide with West South. I'll leave both those links down below. And I would just say, I will say, with his definition of genocide, of it also including expulsion, there is a stronger case for that because of the fact that, it is pretty clear that God did not want. He did not. God definitely wanted them to not live in the land with them. I mean, that's pretty clear. But I will also say genocide also goes under ethnicity. It's ethnicity based, right? And God didn't order any of those commands based off ethnicity. It's based off judgment, and we'll kind of see that better in this next clip, real quick.
So you pointed at several passages, but the prophets through and through condemn Israel in much harsher terms, and in fact, God dispersed them in much greater judgments because they were, and in fact, in Ezekiel it says that because you were supposed to be the light of the world, you are judged all the more strictly and are more responsible. So God was just with Israel, and in fact, he placed more of a burden and a mantle and a responsibility on them and judged them for it than he did the nations. And case in point, what's already brought up was the number of generations that passed before the Amalekites were judged and the Canaanites were judged.
Yeah.
But we can come back to that point.
Okay, but can I ask you then?
Yes.
How do you define genocide?
Right. If I may, I actually have a question I wanted to ask you first.
I think it's important to know what we're talking about.
I understand.
Right? What is a genocide?
Based on the word genome, obviously etymologically, we understand that you're taking it as a tribal seed line, which is fair. I
it could be
understand that.
tribe,
Religion,
religion, ethnicity,
So I can understand.
And we're
that.
talking about the destruction or attempted destruction.
But here's
or,
the problem.
Or
Here's
expulsion
the problem.
of people based on those characteristics.
So here's the problem. Genocide, especially the way it's used today, it implies that it's based on the race. Mm-hmm. And that is categorically against the command of God to conquer the Canaanites. It had nothing to do with their race. It had to do with their sin.
So as well with that guy, I agree with him very strongly. And I loved his point with trying to really differentiate judgment between judgment and genocide. Now, real quick, I will be somewhat covering what I went over in my article, real quick, very briefly as well. So, one of the things was why did God declare destruction on the Canaanites? Because of moral corruption and judgment, because of the protection for Israel, both spiritually and physically, them posing a constant military threat. For the fulfillment of Noah's prophecy, which you could find in Genesis 9:25, and also many scholars believe in this. A lot of these commands or wordings were hyperbolic language. They were ancient war hyperbole. We're trying to make the case that God was not trying to tell them to literally exterminate them, but more of just show judgment and to conquer evil. Not the annihilation of the people themselves. And then of course we see many places where, it's clear that God would not promote genocide throughout Scripture. And then I will also want to focus on one thing with the women and children, because that is a very difficult, that's probably the most difficult part about it. And I would say potential explanations, which again, we're trying to understand God, the potential explanations of why as a means to try to understand it, is we could say that no one's truly innocent. So you can't say they were innocent. They were technically not. Women also participated in the Canaanite sins and idolatry, and they also as well had previous warning. The Canaanites were warned and were called to repentance, and they did not for decades. So they, and when I'm saying for these sins, it is pretty crazy sins like incest, child sacrifice, and bestiality and more. It is not some little minor laws. And then, then you also say how children would grow up adopting these same practices and hostility toward Israel. So you would still face a bunch of problems in the future. And then both women and children would have become resentful to the Israelites and pose a threat. That's as common and a fair assumption with looking at history and human nature. So there's many reasons for it, but I will admit, very difficult though. And then also, I'll also end it with this as well. This goes back into the thing before. He's trying to use this moral argument, and you cannot make a moral argument against God, because here's the thing: it is still your arrogance getting in the way with saying that because God does not fit your standard, he therefore does not exist. You cannot try to put God in the box that you created. You are nowhere near to the extent of God. That's a very illogical thing to do, though, because you don't understand God and because you don't agree with his decisions, therefore he does not exist. That's just honestly illogical. So, hey guys, so I ended this video early actually, so if you want to see the rest of the video and me react to the rest of the Alex O'Connor versus 20 Christians video, subscribe for part 2, and that's going to come out soon, in about 2 weeks. So, looking forward to it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Have a blessed day. Bye, y'all.